Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party, the podcast that is a reboot of a remake of a film in a foreign language. As you may have guessed, one of our main reviews this week is going to be The Girl in the Spider's Web. We'll also be talking about our top 5 favourite and least favourite movie recastings. I'm Dallas King, and to help me out as always is your Filibuster co-host and the Mikael Blomkvist to my Elizabeth Salander. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Hi there, I hope you mean that I'm the Daniel Craig version, you know, someone that's like handsome enough to be James Bond and not some sort of generic sort of European actor.
Oh, I mean, come on. He was absolutely brilliant in John Wick. You know, he's got that whole pencil speech. But yeah, no, he's a good actor, but yeah, I guess looks-wise, you know, comparing the two, yeah, I think David Fincher's one is slightly more pleasing on the eye. But we can get into that in a little bit. So, as we say, we're going to talk about Girl with the Spider's Web. But what else have you been watching this week?
Yeah, it's been quite a busy kind of week. I've finally been able to kind of catch up on a few things, and one of the ones that we spoke about in the last episode was Suspiria, and I finally got the chance to go along and revisit it. And I'm happy to say that my issues with one of the plots of the movie sort of dissipated, and I kind of came out of it thinking, I can't believe I think I kind of overhyped how much of an issue I had with that the element with sort of the Tilda Swinton doctor character. It really wasn't a problem this time. I wish it was still a little bit shorter towards the end with that character, but otherwise I think it was sort of an improved second viewing, and I say that as someone that really enjoyed it the first time. So yeah, it certainly went up even more this time.
Yeah, no, I think following on from our discussion last week about that particular film, I think I was thinking the next day about that particular plot thread and how, you know, this is a man who lost his wife. You know, she disappeared during the Second World War, and he really thought that she probably met a grisly end in the concentration camps and stuff. And it was really about this man sort of dealing with the guilt of, you know, losing one person to this potential regime and ideology and whatever, and he was basically not wanting to do that again and have history repeat itself with Patricia and potentially losing her to the Coven of Witches, although he still didn't believe they were witches. But that's, you can go and listen to the previous episode of the Filibuster for our full thoughts on Suspiria. But yeah, no, thinking back again, you know, I really didn't really have an issue with it, but I can understand that some people prefer this straight narrative of the original with, you know, just keeping it just purely about the witches and how this American girl is sort of brought into the school and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I'm glad that you got to see it a second time. Unfortunately, here in Aberdeen, you know, it's now gone, and I'll have to wait till DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming to see it again. But I cannot wait to watch it again because it is still definitely up there for me in my top films of the year.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you there, and I think it's definitely a movie that isn't, you know, it adds a lot on kind of repeat viewings. There's certain things that, you know, admittedly I did see it the first time, you know, very early in the morning, but you know, you're able to sort of appreciate certain things a bit more, pick up on little threads that you perhaps missed the first time personally, and I felt that there was just so much to get from it. I thought it was, you know, really, really impressive work, and I think it's going to be one of those ones that I almost can't wait for the DVD or streaming or whatever to come out so that someone can like screen cap all of that movie and I can have some sort of computer wallpaper from it. And I'm really hoping one of these sorts of Etsy stores or whatever makes the dance studio like posters that you see throughout the film. I'd love to have one of those up on my wall.
I was thinking the exact same thing. There's one particular poster which looks very much like one of the Black Swan sort of Russian inspired ballet posters, and I think it's for when they performed Volk in New York. And I was just looking at that poster and going, I want that on my wall. Because not only A, does it look cool, but it's also like a film poster that's not a film poster. It's like I'm always wearing sort of Last Exit to Nowhere t-shirts, which are like references, geeky film references that, you know, it's not just a t-shirt that has Heath Ledger, the Joker on it to say it's a Batman t-shirt. You know, it's got a slightly cool reference that people who are fans of the film know what it is, but otherwise it just looks like a cool t-shirt, and that's always sort of appealing to me. So that's definitely one poster which I hope, I've already been looking around to see if it's not online yet, but I think at some point someone will release that, and I'm definitely going to put that up on my wall.
Yeah, I've been doing the searching as well. I've had a look on Redbubble, had a look on Etsy, eBay, nothing yet. But you're kind of watching the movie, and it is so quick how these posters are up on the wall. So I think once the Blu-ray's out, people can sort of really go to town and make these things. So hopefully in a 4 months' time, we'll have something on our wall.
Absolutely. So what else have you been watching this week?
Yeah, I also caught Apostle. I finally the Netflix original movie by Gareth Evans. Sorry, apologies. And I was really quite intrigued by it. As The Wicker Man is one of my favorite movies of all time. I really enjoyed The Raid, one of my favorite action movies of all time. And I think it's certainly quite an interesting movie. My only real issue with it is that sort of like Michael Sheen's character and some of the elements of it are so campy and over the top that those are the most interesting, exciting parts. And when the rest of the film perhaps isn't at that kind of level, it becomes a bit jarring. And I almost want everyone to be at the level that Michael Sheen is at in this movie. And it makes for an interesting enough movie, but somewhat forgettable overall in some respects.
Okay, because this has been on my Netflix list for a while, and it's just one that I haven't got around to. I think the problem is that at certain weeks, the problem with streaming is now that Netflix is so pervasive in releasing so many original films, is there's almost too many things coming out. When, like, for example, this Friday, there's about 4 films coming out at the cinema that I want to see, and it's like, all right, how am I going to fit that in? But once you then start adding in, there's 3 new shows out this month on Netflix, and there's 3 or 4 new movies potentially coming out every week. It's like, how do you find the time to be able to watch all this sort of stuff, unless you're either staying up late at night or waking up at and then watching it from 6 in the morning before you go to work? It's how do you find the time? It's prioritizing everything, and just other things have taken priority, such as The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I watched that this week, but Apostle, I will get around to it at some point. But it was definitely one that I was intrigued by, and I will save judgment on that one. But did you catch The Ballad of Buster Scruggs at the London Film Festival? Or
yeah, I did. I got kind of the double whammy of doing the movie and being able to do some cast and crew interviews on the red carpet, and it was a bit of a disappointing kind of movie for me. I haven't watched it again kind of since it landed on Netflix. I think it has one of the most impressive openings of any sort of Coen Brothers movie, and one of the kind of most exciting characters in the form of this Buster Scruggs. But I found that it was a bit hit and miss, the quality of this anthology. That there was some ones I really enjoyed, like the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, the Zoe Kazan story, the one with James Franco, the one with Liam Neeson, and then others that sort of the Tom Waits one, for example, was a bit forgettable. I wasn't the biggest fan of the closing one. I just found it to be just sort of very uneven, and I wonder if it would have actually been better if, like the Coen Brothers originally planned, for it to be sort of a separate anthology of TV series as opposed to kind of stitched together. It's when you see them all together, you're quite aware of sort of the varying quality. What was your take?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been speaking to a few other people about this one, and it's interesting to get everyone's differing viewpoints because, like you say, there's 6 sort of anthology storylines in this, and it's funny to see different people's reactions and which ones they like and which ones they don't. And yeah, there's definitely the opening one, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs with Tim Blake Nelson, is just fantastic. It's sort of slapstick comedy, sort of western one, as this sort of singing cowboy, but also one of the best crack shots in the West. That was a great opening, and again, it's one of those ones where it's potentially billed like, oh, he's the main character, he'll be popping up in all the different stories, and it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And actually, I was a big fan of, I mean, a lot of people I've spoken to did not like the final storyline with the coach, and with Brendan Gleeson and I think it's John Joe O'Neill as sort of 2 sort of Undertaker type characters who are dropping off their latest payload in a town, and they're sharing this cabin with sort of 3 other guests as they go there. And I really like that one. I like the sort of sinister turn it took and the sort of potential reading of what exactly is going on in the story, but I know a lot of people did not like it. They would have preferred it to end on the previous story with Zoe Kazan, they thought it would have been just the perfect ending to end there and not include this one. But for me, that was those two at the end. So I think it was numbers 1, 5, and 6. I think for me were my favourites, and the other three were just sort of okay. But like you say, watching them all back to back, it is very obvious about the differing levels and quality. But if it had been, say, 6 half-hour episodes, one every week, then I think, yeah, they would have been able to get away with it a bit more. But for me, certainly not one of my more favourite Coen Brothers movies, and definitely lower tier Coens, and especially when compared to even their other westerns like True Grit and stuff like that. It's just, it wasn't all that for me, and yeah, I think a slight disappointment overall. But it still had great touches in it, but overall it didn't hold up for me.
I think the kind of highlight of my kind of film going of the week was Shoplifters. It's sort of a movie that's really come with quite a bit of hype. It was the Palme d'Or winner, so it's sort of started to arrive here in sort of UK cinemas, and it sort of follows this Japanese sort of mishmash family who uncover a kind of young girl in the freezing cold and reluctantly give her shelter, and then agree to sort of look after her and kind of take her through her sort of hardships. So even though they're sort of a poor family, they're scraping to kind of get by and sort of making a bit of a living on sort of petty crime and thieving, really, as the title kind of indicates. It's sort of one of the kind of most beautiful, kind of lovely films of the year about, it does being someone's mother actually, come from giving birth to a child, or can anyone be someone's mother? And I think it really is quite a lovely film. I think the last act of the film is a bit kind of undoes some of the kind of good work of the film. It seems to be a bit heavy-handed, but I think it's definitely a treat if people can kind of find it. I don't think it's showing in any of the multiplexes. It's definitely a sort of film house and indie cinema kind of job, but it's definitely well worth checking out, and it contains some of the best performances of the year.
Excellent.
For me.
Well, this is one of the films which I'm catching this weekend because it makes it up to Aberdeen, and I'll definitely be doing that. But I think from what I've heard on the Twitter chatter is that it's actually done really well this weekend at the independent cinemas. It's had a great screen average, and I think it actually managed to break into the UK top 10. So it's a great result, and definitely sort of proof that people will watch this kind of film. And I guess it's sort of down to the marketing and the PR from this company that has managed to get it it's gotten into the right cinemas. It's been reviewed by the right critics, and it's making some waves. And I guess a Palme d'Or always does help, well, unless it's for Uncle Boon Me and whatever the name of that film was, which I don't think did very well. But this is one that could potentially break through, and it's great to see, and I'm really looking forward to it this weekend. And I think the other film you watched, which is one which I'd seen a couple of weeks ago but didn't get a chance to talk about, and that was Bohemian Rhapsody. Did you catch that one in the end?
Yeah, I finally did. This was my third or fourth attempt at seeing the film, so I finally saw it. And colour me surprised, to be honest. I actually quite enjoyed it, I must be honest. I think there's been a lot of talk about this film, a lot of politics, a lot of debate, discussion, whether this film should be boycotted, whether this film you can separate the talent involved sort of as a director from the work that's been made. But I genuinely enjoyed it for what it was. It's the direction is pretty average. It's a run-of-the-mill biopic. I feel the idea of Queen being involved in sort of a writing and producing level isn't really the best. I think it makes for a bit too of a complimentary sort of movie, but I think Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury is absolutely brilliant and was the highlight of the movie for me. He's someone that is absolutely gripping, and for all the debate and discussion when the trailer landed that it seemed to be kind of overlooking that Freddie Mercury was queer, gay, in the kind of promotional materials, it's certainly there in the films, and I thought I wanted just the story perhaps to focus on sort of Freddie Mercury, but I really genuinely enjoyed it, and I think I'm very surprised by that. I didn't expect that going in, and maybe that went for me actually, but I thought it was a really pleasant surprise, and I can certainly see why it's still packing out audiences kind of weeks on.
This is one which is has got that clear divide right down the middle, and the critics were not fans, but it made a ton of money because, these films always do, and there's a lot of Queen fans and they want to see it. But I know what you mean. Rami Malek is fantastic as Freddie Mercury, absolutely brilliant. But I know that when Sacha Baron Cohen was attached to it originally, it was meant to be more purely, I think, a Freddie Mercury biopic and sort of go more into the sort of darker edges of his life. But one way or another, it became, with Brian May and Roger Taylor on board, it became more of an ensemble sort of Queen biopic with, sort of Freddie, sort of the middle act being about sort of Freddie's sort of troubles and stuff like that when he goes for a solo deal. But I mean, I'm a Queen fan. I love Queen's music and stuff like that. But I'm still, I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but I still know quite a lot of what went on. And there was times when I was sort of watching it going, well, that didn't happen like that. And I'm like, don't think that happened. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that he did not tell the rest of his bandmates that he was just diagnosed with HIV before, 2 days before going on Live Aid. And I was like, it's clearly all done for dramatic effect. And, using the Who Wants to Live Forever from Highlander, in 1985, when Highlander was actually made in 1986, I was like, shouldn't have been using that song there. So my pedantic brain was like, the alarm bells were ringing it several times. But, these films always state at the end, it's always done for, dramatic effect and stuff like that. The facts will change and stuff like that. But for me, it was a very sort of average, run-of-the-mill, paint-by-numbers biopic. The band gets together, they have a disagreement, they reform at the end. But, it was clear the influence of the rest of Queen because, every drop of a hat, there was mention of Brian May having a PhD in astrophysics and stuff like this, or Roger Taylor being painted as this incredible playboy character. I was like, someone's stroking their own ego. I'm not sure about this. But for me, I was pretty down on the film, but that last sort of 15-20 minute sequence where they recreate Live Aid, the work they did in that scene, I came out just sort of going, that was fantastic, because that for me was that film. They really did it well, and if you watch it back against the original footage, it's perfect down to like the Pepsi cups on the piano and everything, and that's where Rami Malek showed that he was Freddie in commanding that stage, that audience and stuff like that. It was just an incredible performance. And yeah, it's one of those, it's one of the most famous, most iconic live performances of all time. And that's for me what saved the film. And if you wow him in the end, you've got a hit. That's a line from Adaptation when Brian McKee's telling Nicolas Cage's Charlie Kaufman about it doesn't matter what you do for the rest of the film, if you wow him in the end, you've got a hit. And that's what Bohemian Rhapsody did. So for all its faults, I still came out, with a big smile on my face at the end. I did have issues with it, but it didn't matter about that point.
I know it was hard not to get I'm not a big kind of Queen fan. I like some of the hits, but I mean that kind of last stretch, the kind of the Band-Aid was, you could feel the chills kind of watching it, sort of even just in an audience, and I could feel my foot sort of tapping, and I was like, no, stop tapping. It was like, and I was getting really into it. And you felt really happy for sort of everyone involved. I mean, it was the bit where I did somewhat suspect it was a bit of ego rubbing as well, like live, Band-Aids, kind of playing away, they're not getting much money, what's going to happen? Then Queen come in, and then the phones start ringing and going mad, and people are cheering in the pubs, and it's like, oh, come on, reel that bit in a little bit. But I just thought that the whole performance on stage was fantastic, and as you say, Malik utterly commanded it. You sort of were looking at that thinking, man, that is Freddie Mercury. I was genuinely impressed. I would be
really interested to know who shot what on that film, because part of me thinks that whole Live Aid sequence was maybe Dexter Fletcher, because it had like a different energy to it, a different feel compared to everything that led up to it. But we may never know, and unless someone spills the beans in a couple of years' time. But it seemed to me like it felt different. It had a different energy to it than the rest of the film. But who knows?
Yeah, I know there was 2 weeks that Dexter Fletcher kind of filled in for, and I somewhat suspect that that last sequence, I think, was probably kind of Bryan Singer. I'd read that he had it was one of the biggest stages that he had kind of worked with, which was quite impressive considering his sort of X-Men credentials. So yeah, I'm curious to see where he kind of came in. I wonder if it was sort of some maybe earlier in the film, perhaps. I'm really not too sure.
We may never know, but it's always interesting to speculate and theorize anyway. But let's move on, and time to untangle the spider's web of The Girl in the Spider's Web. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, this film is based on the fourth book in the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. Originally, the series was written by Stieg Larsson, but following his death, another writer took over the series because that's what his family decided. They wanted to keep milking the cash cow against Stieg Larsson's partner's wishes. But so this is the fourth book, and technically this film is a follow-up to the 2011 US version of Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, directed by David Fincher, starring Rooney Mara. But for studio reasons, they've recast it with Claire Foy in the role and directed by Fede Alvarez, who did Evil Dead and Don't Breathe. So that's a rather convoluted way to getting around to the film. But that is where we are. So what was your thoughts on it? What did you make of it? Were you excited for this going in? What were your initial thoughts?
It felt like an obligation going to see it, to be honest. I didn't like the trailers. I love the David Fincher version. I remember going to see it. It came out on Boxing Day.
Perfect family film after
and
Christmas.
I remembered me. Absolutely. Well, it was so much so that me and my girlfriend at the time, I went to see that while she went into another screen to see Hugo. So we both had very different expectations of that Boxing Day. And I just think it's brilliant. I mean, Rooney Mara, Daniel Craig, Fincher, it was just perfect. And I was of the, personal belief. I was like, it was lightning in a bottle. And knowing David Fincher, he is not going to come back for a sequel. That's not who he is. Maybe when in his younger days, like something like an Alien 3, he would want to do a sequel. But with something like this, he is not going to be interested in doing anything like that. So I was always of the adage, like, you made a great film, Daniel Craig won't come back, Rooney Mara will probably come back, Fincher is not going to come back. Like, we'll wrap up those guys being involved, because anything else will probably taint that. So I'm glad that it is a complete clean slate going into this movie. And I genuinely thought I went in, with it being an obligation. I didn't really want to see it, but I was going to see it for the sake of seeing it. And I didn't like it really at all, to be honest. And I really struggle with Claire Foy, to be honest. She's an actress I just have no real strong feelings on when she's on screen. I just find her to be quite a bland presence, to be honest. I didn't think she was that great in First Man. I thought she was fine in Unsane. I've never watched The Crown, so I could be wrong in that respect. She's just not an actress that I think is particularly great at this moment in time. I thought as Elizabeth Salander, she was pretty boring. I thought the plot was terrible. You go from sort of this girl with a dragon tattoo style story about violence against women, and now this movie feels like it's James Bond. It's got nuclear weapons going off. It's got, the trailers spoiled that, the big third act reveal that, hey ho, her sister's alive, which was revealed in the trailers. It just seemed like so shoddy, and it was just bland. I was really struggled to engage with anything in the movie. I mean, I didn't really like anything at all. I did like when they sort of made sort of Bond style credits, almost like they did with the last movie, the Fincher one. But like, again, this was like completely boring. It was unremarkable, no exciting music. The imagery was forgettable, unlike the Dragon Tattoo one. I just thought it was a really poor movie, to be honest. I think it's crap. What about yourself?
I was not that impressed with it either. I think I was going to see it basically because we needed something, a main release, to talk about on this week's filibuster, and it was the only thing I think we both could guarantee that we were going to be able to see, due to like the independent cinemas having different schedules on and stuff like that. So it was like, fine, I'll go see it. I'd seen the original Swedish version, which I thought was a fantastic film. I didn't actually watch the sequels, so I love the Fincher version. For me, still has one of the greatest teaser trailers of all time, with the Carano's version of Immigrant Song, I would basically go into my cinema when I worked there at the time, and basically play that trailer on a loop, like before the film, before we opened, because the way the bass sort of came from the front of the screen towards the back of the screen as it ended was just one of the best trailers I think I'd ever seen in my life, and would trailer it in front of anything that I could. Although, given that it was a highly rated trailer, there was not much that I could trailer in front of, but any chance I did, I would trailer it. And that film it was a very good film, but having seen the original, it felt unnecessary, but it was still, as remakes go, it was a very good remake. I thought, the casting was good. Still didn't really understand why, if they were remaking it, why they still set it in Sweden, but didn't, and had them speaking in English with middling to no Swedish accents. But hey, that was just me. Maybe they were doing it and I just didn't pick it up. But this one, going into it, I was like, I enjoyed the Evil Dead remake, reboot, whatever it was, and I thought, I thought it was a nice take on it. But this was, watching the final trailer about 2 weeks before seeing it, I was like, I've just seen the film, and I know exactly what you mean about this sort of plot twist about the sister being alive. I mean, I couldn't even remember that she had a sister, but apparently she did. I didn't know if it was something that they'd retconned in or something, but you see it in the trailer, and then it's like, one of Elizabeth's girlfriends is picking up a photo and going, "Oh, I didn't know you had a sister." And she's like, "Oh no, I didn't know she killed herself like 3 years ago." And you're like, "Ah, but I know that she didn't because I've seen the trailer and it says that she's her sister." So, that's ruined. So, it just kind of took out any sort of element of surprise that he said, and it was very sort of pedestrian, and I don't know, it was just lacking that sort of magic or spark. And she's starting off at the beginning as, now I know sort of Tristan and the girl talk about this on Nerd Nuptial and stuff, but she starts off as this Batman type vigilante, where apparently all these sort of police reports and in radio reports of this vigilante woman sort of hurting men who hurt women and stuff, and then like you say, it becomes this female Bond film where she's then basically on this race to get back this computer program that would potentially start World War III and launch all the nuclear devices and stuff like that. And you've got a guy talking her through stuff on the computer. You've got like a Q character, then you've got the guy who's handy with weapons, who's like taking people out, and she basically goes to like this archetypal villainous lair in the middle of nowhere at the end, and you're like, this is just Bond, because she's also very casual and throwaway with her romances as well. And you're like going, it's like, this is what people have been crying out for, a female version of Bond, and then they get this, and it's like, it could have been so much better. And I think Claire Foy was massively underserved with the script and the characterization. There wasn't really anything that made Elizabeth all that interesting. And as like you say, I thought she was very good in Unsane. Like, I think the part in First Man wasn't that great. I've never seen The Crown either, so I can't testify to whether or not she's very good in that. But I did see her in a stage play of Macbeth with James McAvoy, and she was very good in that. I do remember that. But I think it was just the way the character came across in this one. It was just wasn't all that great. And it's something that could have been good, but I can't see them sort of picking up the baton and continuing this series, because I think the one bit that could have been really good was the relationship with the sister, but then it kind of ended far too quickly without any real sort of face-off. At some point, I was expecting her to do like a Blofeld and Spectre and basically tell Lisbeth that she'd been the author of all her pain this whole time. Everything that you've ever done in your life. Haha, it was me. Spooky, spooky, spooky. But because I thought Sylvia Hoeks was good in the brief screen time that she got, because I thought she was brilliant in Blade Runner 2049. I would like to have seen more of her, but for me it was just underbaked and underserved, which has been a real problem, I think, for me with the big studio films this year. I mean, I know it's only the end of November, but I've started to provisionally sort of try and pencil in what I think my top 10 of the year will be, and at the moment there are only two sort of major studio films in that. Mission Impossible, Fallout, and Avengers: Infinity War. Everything else on my letterbox from like the studios seems to have like 1 or 2 stars. You've got like Venom, which was crap. So many other things which were just absolutely just diabolically terrible that I would never ever watch again. And I think it's just been a problem with the studio films this year. Crimes of Grindelwald, terrible. I mean, what do you think? Have you found this with the studio films, or is it just me?
No, No, 100% agree with you, and I think that Avengers: Infinity War, Black Panther as well, even though I had some issues with it, and Mission Impossible. It's been a poor year for big films, and I do have it's a private list on Letterboxd, but I have a provisional list of 28 movies for my short list, and I think there's a lot of diversity in there, some really great, exciting new films, talent, films direct from here, there, and across the world. And I feel like it's been a good year for original films. And, it's I think that's been the exciting thing for me, that, as you kind of get older, this is the sort of, you get a bit bored of like the usual sort of big screen movies. And I think this is why I always think there's a disconnect between sort of Rotten Tomatoes and fans sometimes. And I think of things like sort of this Star is Born and Mamma Mia 2. Like, people are going nuts for them. And Bohemian Rhapsody 2 is doing really well with the general audience, where there seems to be malaise with perhaps critics or people that are seeing kind of a lot of movies, independent movies per chance, or festival stuff. And I think when we see something like Mamma Mia 2 or Star is Born or other things, like, people will, maybe like it or dislike it, but there'll be sort of a bit of debate. Whereas I think people that are going to see these films like the Bohemian Rhapsodies and so on, and that are being blown away by it, because it's something a bit different to what they're usually seeing, which is probably a Star Wars movie, a superhero movie, a Marvel movie. Like, they're seeing those 10 movies a year, so anything slightly different is good. And I think if we could encourage people to see more different things, then I think that kind of people would get a bit more out of the year of going to the cinema, and would seek out things. But I think cinemas aren't helping it either, to go off on a rant here. I mean, a movie I think we're both going to see this weekend, Anna and the Apocalypse, is bizarrely, and it's not just one cinema, it seems to be a trend with every cinema that it's showing, seems to be reduced to one mid-afternoon screening during the week and a late 9 o'clock at night showing. And this is a movie that is starring Scottish and British talent, is shot and made here in Glasgow, and it is a struggle for people to go see, and it's forcing people to probably go along and see movies like Fantastic Beasts, which people seem to have a love-hate relationship with. Why are we trying to take away the people's opportunities to see something a bit local, something that is fun? And musicals are very popular this year. Why can't people see this? I think it's just, there's so many problems, and I'm a bit annoyed about it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I've looked at the Anna and the Apocalypse at my local Cineworld, and it is only on in the evening. There's either 1 or 2 shows a day, and that's it. So I've got to go to my local independent cinema, where there is at least 3 screenings a day and some afternoon screenings. So, but yeah, no, this sort of film is something that should absolutely be getting champions, particularly in Scotland and in Scottish cinemas. How are they meant to find an audience if cinemas don't get it? And that's maybe why so many are now going to Netflix and trying to get audiences that way. I mean, it certainly worked for Caliber, so maybe that's the model these days, that if they want to find an audience, it may not be as immediate as a big opening weekend in a cinema, but they will find that audience eventually. But I know what you mean about the frustration of when you've got one big blockbuster out. Let's say like Ralph Breaks the Internet is on probably 3 screens at Cineworld this weekend, along with Fantastic Beasts, The Grinch. You've got like Robin Hood, Girl on the Spider's Web, and then trying to find something like Anna and the Apocalypse is just, it's competing against for screen time, and it's losing out, unfortunately. But hopefully it's something that finds an audience, because like the problem with cinema, especially getting in towards the holiday season, word of mouth is not going to be enough, because by the time the word of mouth comes out, the screens are going to be filled with Mary Poppins or something else, and people have to get out there and see the film and tell people to go and see it as soon as they can. Otherwise, they will have to wait until it turns up on streaming. And it's certainly the kind of film which I think is going to play well with Scottish audiences. I'm sure if I looked at the Glasgow Film Times, it's probably slightly different, but I guess we'll have to see how it goes. But fingers crossed it does find that audience and connects with them.
Absolutely, and I think it will. I think the cast and crew are enthusiastic about it, especially on social media, and I just wish that it could get an audience like that, because it's not going to get a big packed sellout audience at 9:30 at night on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, and I don't know who's made that decision, because it's clearly not just a cinema programming thing. In fact, that nearly every single chain is making that, apart from I think the Cameo and the Film House and the Belmont have a bit of a diversity in it, but I'm really confused at whose decision that is, because it must be pre-programmed in that way. It can't just be a one-off from The View and everywhere else, all these chains.
No, especially given the fact that this is a film about school kids and stuff like that, and if you're wanting to aim it at that young teen audience, you need that sort of afternoon, early evening screening slot, not just 9:30 on a Tuesday night or whatever. That's going to be too late. If you want to capture that audience, you've got to screen it at a time that they're going to be able to go and see it. So, yeah, it's bizarre programming, but hopefully, like we say, it can overcome that and break out and become a massive hit.
Yeah, fingers crossed when we talk about it, no doubt next week, and we have our interviews, that people will have found it or made an effort to go along and see it.
I'm making an effort to finish work as early as I can on the Friday afternoon to go and see it then, catch one of the very first screenings of it. And then, because it's one which I'm kicking myself still for missing at the Edinburgh Film Festival. I could have been ahead of the game, I could have been putting my feet up for the weekend, enjoying the fact that I've seen all these great new films. But no, I'll be there opening day and championing it as much as I can. Absolutely. So I'm just going to take a wee Iron Brew break, and just going to, something that you shouldn't normally do with Iron Brew, but I'm just pouring it into a mug. And it's a mug which people obviously, it doesn't really work for radio and podcasts, but it's a lovely, what's this? Oh, the A24 project on this mug. Wow, what do you know about that? And I'm doing that because people may not be aware, but you can now get official Nerd Party merchandise on tpublic.com. Perfect for Christmas gifts. So if you want to get a phone case, for example, with filibuster on it, or perhaps an aggressive negotiations hoodie, or a Nerd Nuptial pillow, or an A24 project tote, you can do that by going to tpublic.com, type in the Nerd Party, and bring up a whole host of choices. Will you be purchasing, Lee?
I know what I will be buying all my friends and family and Secret Santas for Christmas this year is merchandise with my shows on it. So yes, I think that will be quite a treat. And I was saying it to you in the podcast green room that you have a book out there with your stuff. Now you have a mug, phone cases, pencil cases, and whatever else with podcasts that you co-produce and co-host on it. So look at you go.
I know it's incredibly narcissistic to actually buy that stuff for yourself. I don't know. Maybe it's even more narcissistic to buy it for other people, but I just couldn't resist the mug and the tote bag, because the artwork which Tristan at the Insane Robin on Twitter on the Nerd Nuptial, the artwork he did for the 24 project is just fantastic, and I just love it, and the fact it looks so good on the mug that I just could not resist.
And it should be added that there is actually a person behind the ghost thing, and that I suppose that will be one of the deep Easter eggs of the Nerd Party Network, where who is actually the ghost? There is a person behind it. I can assure you of that. So maybe one day our listeners will figure it out.
Exactly. So the next thing on our podcast is, given that we talked about The Girl in the Spider's Web and how Claire Foy took over from Rooney Mara, we decided to do a quick top 5 about our best and worst recastings. And it was something that I'd sort of said sort of last week with trying to think of a topic, and I just sort of blurted out there, "Oh, we could do that," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be good." And then I started to think about it, and I was like, "Oh, it's actually much more difficult than I thought." So now you've managed to come up with 5, and I've managed to come up with 5. But I normally do a ranking of this is 1 to 5, best to worst. But what I've done is I really struggled to do that. So what I've done is I've actually picked sort of 5 different examples of recastings, and I'll sort of do it that way. But did you manage to rank yours?
I managed to get somewhere in the end, so I'm quite pleased with that, to be honest. It was a challenge, and some of them I'm not sure if it gets by as a recasting, but I'm going to go out with it. And I've only picked one negative one, so I've tried to go on the positive side.
I've only picked one negative one. We try to be positive here on the Nerd Party, so we're going to try and keep things positive. But you see, now I've deliberately not chosen 2 franchises because I suspect potentially that you might have. So I've stayed away from them. I'll see if my predictions are correct. But do you want to kick us off with your first?
Yeah, we'll maybe get the most predictable one out of the way, but is the recasting of the original Star Trek cast for the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline movies. So yes, I did it. Yeah, I mean, it really is an incredible cast. When you think of it, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, John Cho, Anton Yelchin, Zoe Saldana, Simon Pegg. It almost blows your mind that they got all these actors together, and probably dirt cheap wages at the time based on their very increases in wages since. Like, that is an incredible cast. That is genuinely amazing. You think of someone like John Cho, who's going from strength to strength, things like Columbus and Searching this year. Chris Pine, Outlaw King. He's no William Shatner. He is having a really incredible career. Zachary Quinto is a bit of a TV guy. Look at him now. Anton Yelchin, God bless him. You look at things like Green Room, which we'll discuss eventually on the A24 project. He was just brilliant. The Charlie Bartlett as well. Zoe Saldana, she's gone on to star in one of the biggest sci-fi franchises of all time, twice over, and 3 times over. Avengers, Infinity War, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avatar. They lucked out big time with this cast, and I think I'm so excited every time I see them on screen. I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but for this cast, I'm excited about seeing the cast as much as I am any sort of new story. So it's a real treat to have this cast, and it was on a hiding to nothing putting these together. We've seen a lot of 60s TV shows readapted and recast, and some of them worked quite well, some of them ironically. This was something special, so it's an easy pick for me.
Yeah, no, I knew you were going to pick this, which is why I didn't, because I was very close to having this on my list as well, as sort of casting young sort of versions of these characters, sort of reboot sort of thing. And like you say, I mean, I thought Chris Pine was great. I mean, they all had a difficult job ahead of them, because these roles were so iconic and they'd been played over so many movies. But I think everyone managed to put their own stamp on it. I thought Zachary Quinto was great. Anton Yelchin had probably one of the toughest roles because of the accent and potentially how sort of close to the bone in terms of how slightly stereotypical that character is. So I thought he did a great job. I mean, let's not forget that not a recasting as such, but they had Thor as Daddy Kirk in it,
and coming back in the next one apparently.
Who knows? I mean, apparently there was rumors that Chris Pine might not be coming back, but with now that they basically, since they instigated time travel and stuff, they can do anything they want and make it work. So, but yeah, no, I knew you were going to have that one, and it's an excellent choice because like you say, they did it. They basically made the roles their own in that sort of timeline, and if you then try to recast them again now, I think you would have people up in arms again. So, excellent choice.
So what's your choice? Let's see. I wonder if we're going to have any matches here.
So I've gone for my pick of sort of prequel, sort of rebooting with younger cast members of. I've gone with a double act of James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Charles Xavier and Magneto in X-Men First Class.
A very excellent choice and brilliant casting, I must say.
Yeah, because again, this is a film which might not have worked. By this point, they'd even though it had only been sort of like 3 movies. When you think of Professor X, you think of Patrick Stewart. Ian McKellen was fantastic as Magneto, and it's like we're going to do a young version of the X-Men. We're going to do it, before they set out, when they're kind of mates, and it's in the 60s, and you're like, okay, who are they going to get to do that? And then it's like James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and you go, okay, interesting, because I know McAvoy at one point was potentially rumored for Scotty in Star Trek, but even though McAvoy has hair, which was, oh my god, he's got hair, he's not bald. How can they get away with this? I thought both of them put their own spin on the characters, and I think it was, a great reboot for the franchise. Some of the later X-Men films have not been very good at all, but I thought First Class, directed by Matthew Vaughn, was it struck the right tone, and still has one of the best cameos of all time when they approach Logan in the bar and he tells them to go fuck themselves. Just absolutely brilliant. And for me, those two were just a great double act and really played off each other really well. I know at the end of X-Men First Class, Michael Fassbender becomes slightly more Irish as the movie goes on, but I think he gets a great arc over the films that he's been in, and yeah, I think they earned their place in the X-Men canon, and certainly got endorsed by the original actors as well, getting to play off each other in Days of Future Past as well. So for me, that's my pick of rebooting young ones within the same sort of timeline / universe, because Star Trek counts as the same because Spock is in Leonard Nimoy's Spock is in that, and it's basically the same universe but an alternate timeline sort of thing. So that's why they're encapsulated under that. So yeah, not a reboot. So yeah,
exactly. I will fight anyone that tries to say it is.
Yeah. So yeah. So what was your number 4?
Yeah, I've gone as well. I couldn't resist a James Bond one, and I focused on a very particular one, and that was transitioning from Roger Moore to Timothy Dalton. And I enjoyed Roger Moore as a kid, and I think that probably says a lot. He is a Bond that I've never really kind of taken to as an adult. I struggle. I enjoy The Spy Who Loved Me. Live and Let Die, I like that a bit. For Your Eyes Only, he's a bit of a badass in it. But he was a Bond that stayed on far too long. He was far too old. He was far too camp. He really wasn't the Bond of the books, or a Bond that I was particularly excited about. And then Timothy Dalton comes along, and then he gets criticised for what Daniel Craig gets praised for, and gets classed as the best Bond since Sean Connery, and the best Bond since Sean Connery that's closest to the books. And Timothy Dalton was a Bond ahead of his time. He was dark, he was brooding, he was big, he was aggressive, and I think he's one of the best Bonds. He has 2 fantastic James Bond films as well, and I think getting Timothy Dalton was one of those ones that really set the stage for showing that a sort of Craig model in the modern day can work, even though it received criticisms in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. I think Timothy Dalton is one of the finest Bonds and a real British gem, so anyone transforming into Timothy Dalton is always a treat.
Absolutely, yeah. I think he's a very underrated Bond. I think part of the Bond thing is, I think, like you say, Roger Moore, he was my Bond growing up. It was like those were the movies that were on at the time, so those were the ones that I watched. Similar to Doctor Who, in that everyone has their own Doctor. Sort of, even though I think David Tennant was fantastic in the well, I guess the reboots of Doctor Who. Actually, no, it's the same universe because they're still continuing on. Oh gosh, my brain is going. But yeah, no. When I grew up, it was Sylvester McCoy, so it's like originally, like, oh, he's my Doctor. So it's the same way in Bond. Roger Moore was my Bond, but I still don't think he's the best Bond. So yeah, no, an excellent choice, and it's such a shame that he didn't get to do more with the role. I don't know whether it was the box office and the fact that his films were rated 15 in the UK, so maybe less people go see him. But I mean, he's a fantastic actor. Just have to watch Hot Fuzz to know how good he is, and really he should be in more things. And I would really like to see more of Timothy Dalton. Toy Story 3, he was brilliant in that as well as Prickle Pants. the
And
Shakespearean
we've got a new
hedgehog.
Timothy Dalton film out next year too.
Absolutely, we need more Dalton. So absolutely.
I should use this as an excuse to share a great Timothy Dalton story I heard from an Adam Buxton podcast where they were, I can't remember who they were talking with. It was Edgar Wright. So they're talking about Adam Buxton, obviously, is in Hot Fuzz, and they go, so we want to learn about, you know, what was it like sort of shooting Hot Fuzz. So they're talking about it, that Edgar Wright and Adam Buxton were sitting talking with Timothy Dalton in sort of the town square sort of during shooting, and they saw this mum that was like speaking to her little kids' ears and sent them off to speak to Timothy Dalton. So this little kid goes up to Timothy Dalton and goes, "Hello, sir. Were you James Bond?" I don't know why I made him sound like a Victorian. And he was like, under his breath, "Oh, fuck off." And then the little kid left. And then a police officer came round about 15 minutes later, and the family and the kid had complained to the police officer that James Bond had sworn at them. So the police officer had to tell off Timothy Dalton for cursing underneath his breath at a young kid looking to get a bit of an autograph. And I don't know why. I know I'm sure some people will find that problematic. I just think it's a brilliant, funny story.
Yeah, no, it's just, I think it's a great little anecdote, and yeah, I think it's sometimes you know, sometimes they say never meet your heroes, but I guess maybe he was just having a bad day. That's all.
Exactly.
It was a very stressful time of filming. Who knows? So right, my number 4 pick, and this will be sort of, I guess, along these lines of the same character, but sort of starting again, and I am picking Tom Holland in Spider-Man Homecoming / Civil War / all that. In that, what I was close to, I was thinking Christian Bale, but no, I decided, no, I wanted Tom Holland, because what Tom Holland managed to do was, you know, we had Tobey Maguire did 3 Spider-Mans, and then Andrew Garfield did 2 Spider-Mans, and this was all in the space of around 10 years. We had like 5, and then it was like, do we really need another Spider-Man? And then it was like, but Spider-Man's going to be joining the MCU, and everyone's like, yay, okay, we'll take another Spider-Man. And Tom Holland, for me, is the best Peter Parker and the best Spider-Man that we've had on screen so far. I say so far because we've got Into the Spider-Verse coming out, and potentially that could be the best version of Spider-Man. I've seen 30 minutes of it, and it looked very good. But what Tom Holland did was made me excited for another version of Spider-Man, which we had basically got to Spider-Man ad nauseum. And what was great about his version of Spider-Man was the fact that they didn't go down the, we need to see Uncle Ben being shot, and with great power comes great responsibility, and whatever. It was just, this is Spider-Man, this is what he does, you know, we'll just pick up the ball, run with it. And, you know, he's got the wisecracking down, you know, he's a dancer by trade, you know, he's got great athleticism, he can do all the flips and stuff himself, you know, he doesn't need a stunt double for that. And yeah, he's also a great version of Peter Parker, and, you know, the chemistry with, you know, Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man and stuff like that is just fantastic. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what more he can bring. Well, of course, he can't bring anything more because he's dead. He died in Infinity War. He disappeared. So we're never going to see him again, apart from in the upcoming sequel, which he's already filmed. So I guess we'll wait to see how Avengers 4 turns out.
Yes, I know. I totally agree. I think he's one of these real gems, and I think he's incredibly relatable as well. There almost feels like when you watch him thinking, if I was that age, I could have maybe been Spider-Man. That he seems like someone that it could have been us. I don't know if that's maybe just me.
Oh no, as a kid, I wanted to be Spider-Man. That's who I wanted to be when I grew up, was Spider-Man. And yeah, I'm just too damn old.
I didn't stop some certain actors for it, so there's still a chance. You've got youthful good looks.
Well, you know, if they ever wanted to do another version of Grease, I could easily play a teenager, because, you know, they were all about my age when they filmed the original Grease, so I'm sure Grease is fine. Spider-Man, maybe not so much. My ship may have sailed on that one. So what is your next pick?
I'm going to get my negative one out of the way, and that is Amelia Clarke as she really could be nearly anything she's ever appeared in, but Amelia Clarke as Sarah Connor. I thought that was one of the worst pieces of casting, that we go from, you know, the iconic Sarah Connor in Terminator 1 and 2 to this, and she is so limp, terrible, forgettable, bland, and you look at that and think, we know why she was cast. She was cast for the good looks, sort of her. She's popular in Game of Thrones, which I have yet to watch, so I'm assured she's quite good in that. But I just find her to be a terrible actor. I mean, she was awful in Solo. She was god awful in this. She's just someone that I just think is really very poor. And that Terminator Genesis, she was one of the worst things in it, and that was some going, to be honest.
Yeah, no, she was not good in that, and I'm just looking up IMDb to actually find out if there was anything I've seen her, and I actually thought she was good, because I mean she's okay in Game of Thrones, but not Academy Award worthy or whatever. But Me Before You, Solo, wasn't a fan of hers in Solo, and no, I completely agree. I mean, that was a film which was just really sort of shoddily done. I mean, was it Jay Courtney? I mean, when Jay Courtney's involved in a franchise reboot, I mean, you just have to look at Die Hard. Things are not good. I mean, he could have potentially made my list. Replacing Michael Biehn with Jay Courtney. You're like, oh no, thanks. So no, I completely agree with that one. It was a terrible recasting, because at this point she's meant to be the sort of tough one already in this alternate timeline. She's already been saved by a Terminator, and she's meant to be this sort of hard-ass Linda Hamilton type already, but she just does not come across as that. If it had been her playing the sort of weak-willed, sort of totally unprepared Sarah Connor, maybe she might have got away with that, but not the version that Sarah Connor was meant to be in Terminator Genesis. Absolutely not.
So that's my negative one out of the way. What's your number two?
For my negative recasting, I am going for potentially a rather unique one, in the fact that it is a recasting halfway through a film. Actually, not halfway through a film, right at the end of a film. And that is Johnny Depp taking over the role of Gellert Grindelwald in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Now, in this film, Colin Farrell is playing a rather sinister character called Percival Graves, and Colin Farrell in the right role, in the right sort of menacing thing, can be great, and he was very good in Fantastic Beasts, one of the sort of highlights of it. At the end of the film, it turns out that he'd taken some polyjuice potion or whatever to basically disguise the fact that he was actually Gellert Grindelwald, and it turns out that Gellert Grindelwald looks like a blonde Johnny Depp, and then you're like, oh. And then it's quite clear in the second film that Johnny Depp's going to be playing the role for the rest of it, and you're sort of sitting there thinking, I really wish they'd stuck with Colin Farrell. I really wish it stuck with Colin Farrell, because, even beyond all the stuff outside of the film with Johnny Depp, he's just not that great in the role. And, Johnny Depp used to be one of those guys that I would watch in anything. He was one of my favourite actors, but these days, ever since sort of like the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, his choice in films has not been very good, and he's just not been great. And a real missed opportunity, that one, I think.
Yeah, like I saw the first Fantastic Beasts, and Colin Farrell is like a mark of quality really these days. Long gone are the days of SWAT and so on. I think he's a brilliant actor. And I think, it's a sign of the times where sort of the party boy of the 90s and early 2000s, Colin Farrell, is now the top billing actor compared to someone like Johnny Depp, who really has, really blown it in a lot of people's eyes. Like, I can see him really starring kind of nonsense like these Fantastic Beasts and Sherlock Gnomes really for the rest of his day now, maybe with the odd exception.
Yeah, no, it's a shame to see what's happened, but maybe, he'll have a career renaissance and turn it all around and get back to doing the films that he really should be doing, and basically no more pirates, no more working with Tim Burton, finding sort of great roles. Black Mass, he was good in that, so that's the kind of thing he needs to be getting back and doing with, or maybe working with a director like maybe someone like Wes Anderson, or someone who can maybe, show off a different side to him or something like that. He needs something like that to get his career back on track, I think. So what is your second last pick in your recasting?
Yeah, It's got to be Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the best pieces of casting, one of the best bits of the Star Wars prequels. I mean, the fact that very little kind of... I was watching a thing where I don't know if you've watched them, the Red Letter Media reviews, and I think are the creme de la creme, really, of the kind of, film production, really, in terms of fan work. And they made a really good point where it's like, people talk about, like, you get these think pieces like the Star Wars prequels, why they weren't as bad as you thought, 10 think piece things, and it's like the lightsaber fights and the expanded universe. But like, one thing that people will always have a consensus on is Ewan McGregor. You never hear anyone, even like the hardened Star Wars fans, no one ever goes, I want more midichlorians, I want that actor back from the prequels. But everyone is always like, you know what, I'd love to see a Star Wars prequel sequel with Obi-Wan Kenobi where it's Ewan McGregor. I mean, he's a bit older now, he could probably do it. And I mean, I'm against the Boba Fett's, these Star Wars anthologies kind of filling in the blanks, but everyone agrees that Ewan McGregor should get another shot at it. And I think that's quite incredible in this sort of period of Star Wars fans where everyone's tearing each other down, or they all have different diverse opinions, that this is the one unifier, and that's quite an achievement, I must say. So I think well done to Ewan McGregor, and I will always think of him in the Star Wars beginning DVD special feature where he's like lightsaber fighting away and the camera cuts to me, he's like, so my agent goes to me, do you want to be in Star Wars? And I'm like, yeah, bloody hell I do. And then he just starts like swinging around his lightsaber like the happiest kid in the world. I think we can all relate to that.
Absolutely. I mean, this Phantom Menace was probably started filming about late 97, 98. So Trainspotting had come out. I'd seen Shalgrave, so I was a huge Ewan McGregor fan. So hearing that he was cast as Obi-Wan Kenobi, I was very, very excited. Even against the advice of his uncle Dennis Lawson, who played Wedge Antilles, saying, "Oh, you don't want to get down that road." He did it, and like I say, that the Star Wars, the beginning, that sort of hour and a half long making of documentary is probably better than the Phantom Menace. And it's the scenes where he's got the lightsaber, he gets to choose his lightsaber handle, and then he's on set and he's making the noises, because you can't not make the noise of a lightsaber, even though like you we do all that in post. We put the noises in. He can't stop himself, and the fact that they had to slow Ray Park and Ewan McGregor down on the fights because they were that good, they were doing it too fast. He's great. And I think it's a role that he really grew into. He had like the voice and stuff, but you could really see him becoming the sort of Alec Guinness style in Revenge of the Sith, which has some really great moments in it. You've got the Darth Plagueis the Wise sort of speech by Ian McDiarmid, but the whole sort of emotion of the final fight, and Anakin, I have the high ground, and then the thing which all Scottish actors do, I know they don't intend it, but whenever they shout, they become Scottish again. So, you've got the Anakin, I have the high ground, and then you were the chosen one. It's just like, and you just see it like anytime that Gerard Butler's in anything and shouts, he suddenly becomes Scottish again. It's that kind of, you can't help it, and it's just. But yeah, no, he was great in one of the highlights of the original Star Wars trilogy. Attack of the Clones, I think he was hampered by a rather terrible subplot in that one, but I think in the first and the third one,
I thought you were going to say the wig.
He really shines in them.
Yeah, I think the fact that we agree on this one is I'm very surprised it wasn't in your list.
No, but I mean, what I've gone for as my number 2 is for something in the same continuity in the same series, and that is Mark Ruffalo as Bruce Banner / the Hulk. And so this is in the MCU, and the Incredible Hulk film, which was the second MCU film, starred Edward Norton, who was good, but let's just say was a rather demanding actor, and did script changes and stuff like that, and originally wanted a 3-hour long cut where it was more of a Jekyll and Hyde character study, whereas at that time the MCU wanted a more sort of blockbuster friendly style story, and so they decided to part ways. And then that meant that Mark Ruffalo took on the role for the Avengers, and quite frankly has never looked back. The MCU has, previous with this, Don Cheadle had replaced Terrence Howard in Iron Man 2, but for me, Mark Ruffalo seems the perfect Bruce Banner, and I think it was helped by the fact that he was able to do the motion capture and the CGI had come along leaps and bounds. His Hulk is a much better version of the Hulk than Edward Norton's one was very purely sort of CGI. You couldn't really see him in it, and I think that he's always one of my favorite characters, and he's come on leaps and bounds in terms of the character of Bruce Banner, especially particularly in Thor Ragnarok. I thought he was just so funny in that. He had the great double act with Thor, and I think he's going to have an interesting role to play in the next one in his ongoing battles with the Hulk, who now decides he doesn't want to come out because he basically got pussy whipped by Thanos and is having a bit of a sulk. So
I would just love to see the world where it's got Edward Norton in the Avengers. I just can never picture it. It feels like he's traded that in for the world of Wes Anderson.
Well, I mean, I think I'm happy with the choice. I'm happy with that trade because I think Edward Norton is actually very good in the Wes Anderson sort of cinematic universe. So I'm happy that they've made the switch and it's worked out for everyone, I think.
Oh, definitely. I think that's
So
a given.
what is your number one pick in terms of movie recastings?
I have gone for Christian Bale as Batman because as much as we sort of look at kind of Christopher Nolan as sort of the man who, you know, rejuvenated the Batman series, that you need a Batman to be, you know, match it. You know, it's all well and good having the people behind the scenes, but you need someone in front. And I think Christian Bale, I think, doesn't get the praise that he deserves for his role as Batman and Bruce Wayne. I think he gets overlooked. I think he gets underrated by a lot of people. I think it's, you know, he's brilliant in Batman. He really plays that playboy, you know, role well. He plays the, you know, the billionaire philanthropist well. He plays the Batman really well. He does it all really well. And I remembered when he was cast, having seen sort of American Psycho and Machinist, it was like, of course, it's like a brilliant choice. And I think that we definitely got one of the best Batmans ever in sort of Christian Bale. I think maybe Michael Keaton still kind of just takes it for me. I think he's probably the best Bruce Wayne. So I think we're so lucky to have Christian Bale, and him and Christopher Nolan together made a hell of a team. And I would almost maybe put him in as my transition as well. I'll put in Christopher Nolan in there as well.
No, for me, Christian Bale is the best Bruce Wayne and up there with the best Batmans. I think, yeah, he does get a lot of stick, and I don't know, I think a lot of it comes from, certainly from Batman Begins and his Batman voice. You know, the, where is he? You know, that kind of thing.
But it makes so much sense, doesn't it?
I was always trying to argue people that it makes total sense. He's trying to disguise his voice, because if he just did his normal voice, people are going to go, like, Batman sounds a hell of a lot like Bruce Wayne, you know, because all these other superheroes, it's like, Superman doesn't change his voice, just takes off his glasses. Spider-Man doesn't change his voice. All these, he's trying to do it because he, like you say, he wants to protect the people who's close to him. But so if everyone knew it was Bruce Wayne, you know, it would defeat the point. So he does put on his voice, and yeah, it is, you know, slightly, yeah, it's opened itself up to huge amounts of parody, but I think it totally works for the franchise and that world that they live in, where everything is real, everything is based on science. There are no, you know, fantastical superpowers or anything, and it's just great. And like you say, he actually plays three roles. He plays Batman, he plays Bruce Wayne, and he plays the public persona of Bruce Wayne, which is very Patrick Bateman-esque. But, you know, he's got all these different sides to his character, and he plays them all absolutely brilliantly. And yeah, for me, yeah, definitely up there with definitely Bruce Wayne, and definitely up there for the best Batman. You know, part of me always thinks that Adam West will always have a soft spot in my heart for his version, but I think for me, as much as I like Michael Keaton, the Christopher Nolan films are for me the best superhero films that we've ever had. And yeah, what he did with that franchise, considering where Batman was at the end of Batman and Robin, you know, he did this true superhero job of bringing that franchise back to life.
So who's your number one then?
Well, it was an odd one because I've picked, the final category I chose was during filming, recasting during filming, and I originally had Michael J. Fox down because they started filming with Eric Stoltz and then realised it wasn't working, so Michael J. Fox. But then I remembered that Michael J. Fox was actually originally cast, but then he was filming Family Ties, couldn't do it, so he had to drop out, but then they got him back. So I thought, I won't go with that one. Part of me thought Harrison Ford for Indiana Jones, but he's become so synonymous that you can never see anyone else. I'm just completely discounting Tom Selleck in that. So what I've gone for is actually the return of two previous actors, and this is the case of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus and the recasting of Heath Ledger's character due to his tragic passing. He sadly died during the filming of the Terry Gilliam film, and they were thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to get around this problem? Do we just shut down? Do we just can it? Do we do everything? But Terry Gilliam liked his performance, Heath Ledger's performance, so much that he wanted to honour him by finishing the film, and what they managed to do was basically have this magic mirror where Heath Ledger's character would go through the mirror, and what that allowed them to do was basically recast him on the other side with a different persona, and they got his friends Colin Farrell, Jude Law and Johnny Depp to take on the role, and they all bring a different quality to the character and a different side to it, and I think it just works for that film and for the mind of Terry Gilliam, and I think it was just a really sort of lovely way to celebrate Heath Ledger's life and his performance in that film, and that's why I've picked that.
Yeah, a very inventive and fitting tribute to pick. I remember when they announced this was going to be the way they're doing it. It's a film I still have to see, actually, and I just thought it was such an inventive way to do it, and I think that sort of shows the sort of creative talent that Terry Gilliam is. So I think an excellent choice, and I can't believe it's been 10 years already.
I know, but yeah, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's not the best film in the world, but I think it's a really sort of interesting watch, and I think it's worth watching for the performances, if nothing else. Like Colin Farrell is brilliant in that film, and Jude Law is great. Johnny Depp is probably the worst of the three, but Jude Law is another actor I think is sometimes incredibly underrated, but in the right role, such as like the talented Mr. Ripley or something, he can really sort of shine, and he does in this.
Excellent. Well, I can't believe that. I think we originally planned to have a 35-minute, 40-minute episode. Yeah. This is nearly one of our most bumper ones. We're already at the 70-minute point, so we've certainly gone all out here.
I know, but we'll wrap things up now. But before we do, just wanted to highlight once again the A24 project, which is our new podcast on the Nerd Party. And every 2 weeks we look at two films from the back catalogue of A24 films. Recently we just released episode 4, which looked at Under the Skin and Locke, and on Monday we're going to be reviewing Obvious Child and The Rover. And if you like the podcast, if you listen to it and you want to leave us a review, if you go to iTunes and leave us a written review, you could be in the chance of winning a Girls on Top tee and the A24 film of your choice on DVD. If you leave us a review by the 16th of December, we'll be picking a winner after that. And yeah, Lee, are you looking forward to the next A24 project?
Yeah, very much so. We have Robert Pattinson's first appearance in the A24 movie series. We've got some exciting news as well. The first kind of awards of the season have already taken place in November, and A24 have won quite a few there. So those are certainly interesting movies for us to look forward to discussing in about 2 years' time. So yeah, I'm loving it.
Absolutely, yeah. But so up until then, and where people want to come and talk to you on social media about A24 films or anything on Filibuster, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. And what about yourself?
They can find me on @ChampCelluloid or championshipcelluloid.blogspot.com, and you can find everyone on the Nerd Party on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, the home of such podcasts such as Missing Frames, Nerd Nuptial, Aggressive Negotiations, Time Space, The Owlpost, and many, many more. But until next time, I guess I'm going to go untangle myself from the spider's web, and we'll see you next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd